Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now, here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhaj with Authentic Living with Roxanne. Today I have a special guest, Kemi Ogunkoya, and she is coming to us all the way from Nigeria today. So Kemi, thanks for coming back. Actually, Kemi and I recently did her YouTube where she interviewed me on leadership, and we actually recorded hers, and there was a bit of a glitch. So we're getting the option to do it yet again, which is I'm so glad that Kemi could do that again today. Kemi, thanks so much for coming back.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure.
So Kemi is a leadership expert. She works with leaders, and she's done a lot of work internationally in North America, in Europe, and in Africa and Asia as well. So we're going to talk a lot today just about, she has a model that she's developed around leadership, but we're going to talk a little bit about that and kind of what she's seeing out there today in the world of leadership. So Kemi, tell us a little bit about what made you, did you always want to work with leaders, or how did you what was your path to deciding that you wanted to work with leaders?
All right. So thank you again for having me on the show. All right. So, well, I didn't start out wanting to work with leaders directly. I started out working during, business consulting, and in some way we were working with leaders. However, I realized that a lot of times, we go on to present very wonderful implementation documents for organizations, and yet somehow, somewhere, egos just find a way of throwing that right out of the door. And then I realized that, what? We do not have shortage of, strategy. We do not have shortage of ideas, but then we do have a leadership deficit. And until we're able to deal with the leadership deficit effectively, not so much is going to change in terms of how businesses are being run. And then I decided to start focusing on leaders within organization to ensure that they have the right mindset, and, beyond just having people occupy certain positions of leadership because it seems like they are a feat, rather getting to that point where we can actually develop people to become great leaders, and invariably, just find a way of narrowing that leadership gap and that leadership deficit. And, over the years, I have been privileged to work with leaders all over the world to ensure that they're able to develop the right competence for their leadership roles and actually let the organization breathe.
Mm-hmm. So there are I would say there's definitely, for leaders to move along and to move up the ranks, they have to have a certain capacity to be able to lead. But when they get to a point where they get blocked, what do you find are some of the core fundamental things that might stand in the way of a leader increasing their capacity to lead more effectively when they hit, a certain level of management?
Yeah. So, so if we look at the management metrics, for example, when a leader gets into the working environment, be it corporate or otherwise, at that point, it seems like they need more technical skills, right? And then as they continue to ascend the ladder, get into about mid-management, then there is more requirement for the, human skills, and then they're able to have some level of technical skills, and then conceptual skills is also going to be required. But then as leaders continue to progress, there seems to be more reliance on their human skills, and then, also great reliance on their conceptual skills. Now, I've worked with a lot of leaders, and I realized that as leaders go up the rank, there seems to be a struggle as to where exactly they need to pay their attention on. But then if leaders are able to focus more on the human skills and then the conceptual skills, it would help them understand exactly what the business needs at every point in time. So I say that leaders, need to really get to that point of understanding when to be on the dance floor and then when to be on the balcony, which means that at a particular point, they need to start focusing more on strategy than being buried in the operational running of the organization. So when leaders get to that point where they constantly find themselves struggling, or just being into all the operations, then it's at that point they know that they really need some form of intervention. And intervention could come in different forms. We could find intervention in terms of having an incredible team, to work with, where you know that even when you are dropping the ball, you have competent hands, to lead you on, to guide you, and then to hold you accountable. So I say that when leaders are at that point where they are struggling, it's important for them to revisit, to review, and then do what exactly it requires for them to get back on track.
So I would say that a certain level of competence is a given at any given point.
Absolutely.
However, let's talk about the difference between the dance floor and the balcony, because I'm interested in that concept. So do you find that most leaders recognize when they're getting stuck? It's no longer about strategy, but it's something to do with the human element, which I would say, I'm going to assume that's where the balcony is. Am I correct in that? Learning when to lay back, kind of, sit on the periphery and let others do the dancing. Is that my understanding of your analogy there, Kemi?
Okay, so with the dancing, with the dance floor and the balcony, it's pretty much so as leaders, at some point you're really hands-on, right? You're really hands-on. But then what we realize is that a lot of times, a lot of leaders get stuck working in the business and then lose sight of working on the business.
Right.
So working in the business is you being on the dance floor where you are, and just if you can imagine being on the dance floor, all the activities are going on right around you. There's so much buzz, and then there's a limit to the view that you would have, or pretty much having that aerial view when you're on the dance floor. Okay, so that's where all the operations and all the bustling and all of that goes on. But then being on the balcony gives you a more strategic view. So you pretty much have the bird eye view where you can see things from different perspectives. So you're on the dance floor, and then everything just seems to be all around you. You can hardly see what's going on feet away. But then from the balcony, you're able to assess exactly what is happening. So imagine that you have a stand where, there's a band, where you have a stage. You just have a better view, and then you're able to take certain decisions based on that. So for a lot of leaders, they get stuck working in the business, rather than working on the business. For great leadership and effective leadership is about understanding when to be on the dance floor, because as leaders, we have to get our hands dirty, and then to understand when to be on the balcony so that you can be in that place of strategic, or just make better and strategic decisions from that, standpoint.
So when is it that you find leaders, let's say, do you find that most leaders have that skill to recognize this versus working in the business versus on the business, right? So higher level strategic thinkers are able to recognize, I need to demonstrate competence and capacity in my skill, but I have to know when to back off. Do you find that with the leadership teams that you work with, Kemi, are most people able to recognize that I'm kind of, we call it being stuck in the weeds, right? You're on, it's a set kind of same as being in the dance floor, but there's some people that really kind of like that, right? They feel alive, they feel energized because they're in there and they're getting their hands dirty. And how difficult is it, do you find, that people that are really like that part of the business to take that step up strategically?
Okay, so very great question, Roxanne. I work with a lot of leaders, and I realized that just like you have rightly said, there's a level of adrenaline that just comes on the dance floor, right? You're so overwhelmed, and then you're so swamped up with all the activity. However, it takes a level of awareness, and a level of competence for leaders to get to that point where fine, they're enjoying being in the business, but then they understand that being in the business for too long would actually be affecting the results that they're able to achieve on the business. So as key leaders within the organization, if you're not focusing on strategy, if you're not focusing on being at that vantage point where you are able to have that overview of the organization and make key decisions, then you just have growth being stunted in one way or the other. So I find that a lot of leaders struggle, to accept that they need to step out of the dance floor. I think it's more from that place of awareness rather than from the place of competence. So yes, they know what to do, but then, in this VUCA world that is highly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, we just feel that, the business needs more of me on the inside. And another thing I realized is that for a lot of leaders who haven't been able to gain a level of confidence in their team, where there's a low level of trust in on such teams, you find out that the leaders feel that they always have to be on the dance floor. Okay, so until leaders get to that point of comfort where they invest more in building their team, and then they want to focus on elements like trust, and developing competence of their team members, then they would always find themselves having to be on the dance floor to make up for whatever lapses within the organization or system.
So trust is really the core fundamental that obviously teams need. So what you're saying is that sometimes leaders feel like they need to microscopically be involved when there's a variation of trust. But I'm going to assume on the counter side of that, Kemi, that when you have trust, there's an innate relaxation within the leader to say, my team has capacity.
Absolutely. So, there's so many elements that would help develop that level of trust within a leader, and competence definitely is one of those key skills. But like I say, that when leaders leave competence to just their employees or their constituents to develop on their own without really investing in their journey of growth, that they would always find themselves in that situation where they have to work longer on the business, and then they have to work harder on the business. So yes, competence to a great extent will help, develop some level of trust in the capacity of the employees or the constituents, as the case may be. However, it's important trust will not magically, just come on its own.
So let's talk a little bit about trust, and I know you have a model, Kemi, that you developed, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the model and how within that model, where is trust kind of woven through? Is it that the levels of the model get to a point where a leaders develop their capacity to function, and inadvertently it creates trust, or is it that they're working through trust all the way along in your model?
The model is called the dozen model, and it's a leadership framework that I developed after years of working with a number of leaders across, different industries, different continents, and, different organizations. And we realized that there are 12 key factors that leaders, or 12 key elements that leaders need to leverage on to, attain that level of effectiveness as leaders. And, there's clarity, there's communication, there's competence, there's, connection, there's, community. And, looking at each of these elements, each of them rely heavily on trust, right? So when we talk about clarity within the organization, for example, we're not just talking about clarity as it affects the leader. Not just the leader has to be clear on what the organization wants to achieve. However, the leader, from that level of clarity that he or she has about the business, the organization, the values, the mission, and all of that, is able to clearly be able to also, relay some level of clarity to their constituents. So that will also heavily depend on the level of trust within the organization, because a leader needs to be able to trust you to a great extent for them to believe in your vision of the future, right? So let's look at communication, which is also another key element of the model. And when it comes to communication, there is a level of trust that is required for me to believe exactly what you have said, for me to have that level of comfort with what you have said to me as a leader. So I want to believe, that the vision of the future that you have painted is something that is real, and then is something that is attainable. I want to believe, the manner with which you're able to relay your message, that there's some level of consistency around that. So you see that even communication is heavily reliant on trust. Now, connection, right, which is another key element of the model. It's a no-brainer. There's no connection without trust. Okay, so that's also heavily dependent on trust. Another key element of the model is community, right? And I believe that as leaders, we need to be able to build a community of other leaders by constantly investing, in their growth and also their development. And for that to happen, there has to be a level of trust, right? And another key element is consequence, for example, right? I need to trust that my leader, for example, is going to be held accountable for their actions and their inactions. And for me to be able to wholeheartedly believe what you are saying as a leader, I need to know and trust you that you would hold yourself accountable for your actions and inactions, and then other people within the organization or within whatever system will also be held accountable. So for every element of the model, we cannot separate the importance of trust. And that's why we see a lot of organizations that struggle, to be able to achieve a level of results when there's no trust. So trust is a key element of leadership. It's a key element in the dozen model, for example. And in as much as, trust in itself is not an apparent element of the model, because all the models all begin with C, but then trust is infused in every element of the model.
So I would say that, let me play devil's advocate for a second. There have been some companies that have been successful, and at maybe the level of trust is not a pinnacle. So, some people might say, well, what about, and I can't think of a particular, company right now, maybe you can think of one where they actually still achieved, but there was still a level of uncertainty or a lack of capacity to trust openly, but they still continue to perform very well. So what do you say to people that might come to you and say, why is trust that important? I have this example of this company here, company X, that still seems to do well quarter by quarter or year over year. And they don't seem to be, having an optimal level of trust.
All right. So definitely we would have, such organizations to point our fingers at, to say, oh, you know what? So why do I need to worry about trust? But when you look beyond what you have on the surface, right? What is the level of engagement that the employees have towards the brand? Okay, because sometimes I say that there's a lot of cost for ineffective leadership, and sometimes this cost, we may not be able to measure it directly, but then it doesn't mean that this cost do not exist. So yes, trust, for example, based on research, has been linked to high level of employee engagement, have been invariably linked to organizational results. So we cannot really separate it. So yes, it may seem like we're winning, but then I bet that, there's certain elements of a business that is cracking and then is crumbling on the inside. And it's just a matter of time for the owners to get to deal exactly with that. Because when the employees are not as loyal, or they're not as engaged, or, they don't just trust their superiors, or then their leaders within the organization. It affects how they work. It affects the level of productivity. And sometimes we may not be able to measure all of this, just as straightforward, but then it does in the long run, affect it. And something that I can just think of as an analogy for this is, imagine that you're sweeping, and then you just find a way of always putting the dust under the carpet, right? It's just a matter of time, okay, that the rug is not going to just seal perfectly on the floor anymore. So for such organizations, yes, it may seem like we're winning because there are other metrics that may be involved. So say, for example, you may be paying high, and then doing very well in terms of remuneration, but then it isn't enough. And then it's also important to understand that the workforce is changing now, and then the demands of the workforce is also changing. So we have a workforce who is more into purpose, is more into flexibility, and then more into culture, right? So things are absolutely changing. And then, the demands of the workforce will also find a way of expressing itself in how such organizations are being run.
So now that we're opening up, the world economy is starting to open up. What are some of the things that companies have to think about in reference to culture now that we've kind of gone through this uncertainty? And what are some of the core things that people need to think about because the world has been in fear, and employees have been through a lot of trauma, I would say. So what would be some of the pieces of advice or things that you would suggest leadership or leaders think about now that we're opening up and people are returning to work in some kind of form, some kind of semblance, whether it's asynchronous, in person, or virtual?
I'll start by saying that it's important that organizations accept the fact that the same employees who left the organization, before the lockdown, are not the same people who are returning, right? And just like you have rightly said, people have had to deal with quite a lot. People have had to deal with, loss, illness, losing a loved one, grief, and just trying to get their mental health in a place of stability. So do not assume that the same guys who left the office are the same guys who will be returning. So organizations need to ensure that there's a safe place for people when they return to work. Okay, a safe place where people will be able to talk about some of the personal challenges that they deal with, and without feeling judged about it. So the truth is that we haven't exhausted just how people are responding to the aftermath of this pandemic just yet. Okay, so it's important that organizations are able to develop great level of competence within their HR, for example, to ensure that when people come back, there's a level of support for them. Okay, it's also important that organizations pay attention to flexibility, and just like I mentioned earlier, that we did a survey within some of the organizations that we work with, and then we realized that what organization or what a lot of business leaders are looking for include flexibility, right? They're also thinking about culture, and then they're thinking about purpose. So organizations need to be able to prove themselves that they also care about these areas, and are also able to put their best foot forward. I think it's also important to, ensure that beyond having people come to the office for, long hours, we're able to see exactly how we can also create a hybrid, environment where people can not only work from home, but then they can also feel free to come to work, because I think that one aftermath of this whole pandemic is that we really don't know the long-term effect of the total separation from the workplace. I think that people need to still be able to connect with each other. I think that people still need to be able to find a place where they can share ideas, where, we do not totally let go of elements of mentorship, for example, peer learning within the organization, because we have to work from home extensively. So the organizations need to ensure that, we do not totally lose out on all these, learning moments at work, in the bid of trying to say, let's just go adopt a full work from home since it's working, and then people are as productive as ever. So those are some of the three key things that I will talk about. And probably I add this, right, that leaders within the organization also need to become more flexible, in their thinking of what is acceptable and then what is not acceptable within the workplace. So I think that would also go a long way.
So we always talk about employees returning, but what about leaders? What is it that they need? As they have had to be the strong ones and the transparent ones and the available ones and the connected ones in order to create the bridge for their employees. But what do leaders need? And going back into that, like you said, it's a bit of an abyss, really, because we really won't know the impact of the return to work. But what is it that you think leaders need most going back and trying to reintegrate things, because they're the ones that need to stay strongest in order to support their employees and then in turn the culture?
So I think that leaders need to not confuse being strong, or need to ensure that they don't confuse vulnerability for wanting to put on that face of being strong. So I think leaders need to be at that point where they understand that they are also going through a process, because they're human, and being a leader doesn't mean that your veins just suddenly freeze and then you don't feel anything anymore. So it's important that as leaders return to the workplace too, they come from that place of being vulnerable about their own experience too, so that the constituents can understand, oh, you know what, I felt this, my leader also felt this, and that just gives me some comfort. So I think leaders have to come back to the workplace not just as superheroes with capes. They need to come back to help people understand that they have also gone through the process. And I strongly recommend that a lot of leaders also assess some form of mental health support. Okay. And I remember having this conversation with a top business leader a few weeks back, and he thought, what, I think I'm just fine, right? I'm just fine. And then as we got on the conversation, he realized that he probably needed some support, because in as much as he did not experience any form of direct trauma, he had employees within the organization who passed in the course of COVID, and he hadn't even dealt with that because he had to have that strong face, and be the leader for everyone else. So yes, pay attention to your mental health as a leader. Don't just assume that, because you have been strong and then you have been tough all through this entire period, it just has absorbed you of the ability to feel, the ability to, be empathetic and all of that. So get some level of support, mental health support, as the case may be. But then come back to the workplace being vulnerable, come back to the workplace being open to learn, come back to the workplace not being judgmental about people's experiences or exactly how they feel. And, just give yourself room to breathe.
Just be gentle and kind, because it's quite the space, right? Because you have to shuttle between vulnerability and strength. Right. So and vacillating from those parts can be difficult at times. So Kemi, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much. For people that are, would want to speak to you or find out more about your capacity to work with them and their organizations, tell them a little bit about where they can reach you so that they can reach out if they'd like to connect with you.
I'm available on LinkedIn, and it's Kemi Ogunkoya, and that's KemiOgunkoya. So you can find me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and then I'd respond. Or then if you also go to my website, it's www.kemiogunkoya.com. I'm sure we can connect there.
Thank you so much. So again, I guess what I'm walking around away from is know when to step off the dance floor and develop trust so that you can get to the balcony and let the others that you've employed demonstrate the capacity that you've instilled in them and their capabilities, which obviously, you recognize talent, so let them follow through, but be there to support them when they need it most. So again, thanks for tuning in. If you're needing any information on authentic leadership, as you know, my book will be coming out soon. You can reach out to me so that we can talk a little bit more about authenticity as a leader and how it impacts your teams. So again, thanks so much, Kemi, and everyone take care, and we will chat with you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhaj.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.